This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show with part 2 of my recent interview with the reporter Chris McGreal, who was the Johannesburg correspondent for The Guardian during the last years of apartheid through 2002. He's been closely following the South African-born billionaire Elon Musk, who was born in 1971 in Johannesburg, South Africa, and raised under the country's racist apartheid laws. Some of McGreal's pieces include what does Elon Musk believe and how the roots of the PayPal mafia extend to apartheid South Africa. I began by asking Chris McGreal to discuss Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman.
We see Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman. He immigrates to South Africa in 1950, and that's really when apartheid's just starting to kick in. The 1950s are when the first laws, South Africa had discriminatory laws before, but you see the specific apartheid laws, which are much more aggressive and in many ways reminiscent of the Nazi Nuremberg laws against Jews in the 1930s. They have very similar echoes in stripping black people from the right to work in certain places, their movements, controlling them, confining them to areas. You already had a situation which is now, come to the fore because of recent events with Trump. But
you mean with Elon Musk giving the Nazi salute?
Yes, but also with the sanctions over land, is that the 1913 Land Act had already deprived most black people of land in South Africa anyway. At that point, the 7% or 10% as it was of the population that was white owned more than 85% of the land under the Land Act of 1913. So the apartheid laws kick in the 1950s. Elon Musk was born in 1971 in Johannesburg, and at that point the Prime Minister was a guy called John Vorster. And John Vorster's background is very telling, really, because Vorster in the 1930s had been a member of a neo-Nazi militia called the OB, which was openly sympathetic and linked to the Nazis in Germany. It was responsible for all kinds of attacks, but including burning Jews out of their businesses in Johannesburg.
And we're talking about what years?
In the 1930s, so the late 1930s. And then South Africa goes to war as an ally of Britain against Hitler. The OB and the groups that support them, like Vorster, people like Vorster, they actively oppose that. They actually are in touch with, OB is in touch with German military intelligence, and they plan to assassinate the Prime Minister of South Africa, Jan Smuts, and overthrow the government and have it support Hitler. That plan fails because the Germans are unable to provide the necessary weapons and back out. But in 1942, John Vorster, later Prime Minister, stands up and gives a speech, and he talks about the system that their kind of ideological belief system, which was Christian nationalism. And he says, Christian nationalism in South Africa is the same as Nazism in Germany and fascism in Italy. It's all anti-democratic. It's all the same thing. By 1971, when Elon Musk is born, that man is the Prime Minister of South Africa. And Christian nationalism is the basis of not only the political philosophy, but the entire education system that Elon Musk is brought up into.
So take us from Elon Musk's grandfather and moving to South Africa in the 50s to his father, how they gained their wealth.
So Elon Musk's grandfather moves there in the 1950s. He's not particularly prosperous. He arrives without a lot of money, but it's Elon Musk's father, Errol, who makes the real money, principally through investments in emerald mines in Zambia. And, mining conditions in southern Africa in that period were really pretty dire in the 1960s and 70s. Very high death rate, very poor conditions, but the owners got very rich. And Musk lived what can only be described as a neo-colonial life. If you were white South African in that period and you had any money at all, you lived with servants at your beck and call, you lived in sprawling housing, and what you see with Elon Musk is that when we get a glimpse into just how much money he had when he and Elon's mother get divorced, she says at the time that, well, he owns a yacht, he owns a jet, he owns several houses, so there was considerable wealth there.
Was the grandfather of Elon Musk on the record in his support for Forster?
Well, he was certainly on the record in his support for apartheid, very vividly so, yes. And he said that that's why he'd moved to South Africa from Canada in 1940, was in support of it. Now, the grandfather himself is killed a few years later in a plane crash, but is not known what Elon Musk's grandmother's personal views of Forster particularly were, but they were both avid supporters of the apartheid system, and the grandmother lived for a number of years afterwards.
So you've been talking about Elon Musk's maternal grandparents and how they moved to South Africa, but talk about their roots in Canada.
Originally, the grandparents have no connection to South Africa. They're born and grew up in Canada. And in the 1930s, the grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, he's head of the Canadian branch of a US movement called Technocracy Incorporated. And Technocracy Incorporated is essentially a movement to overthrow democratic government in the United States and have technocrats, but big businessmen in many ways, come in and run the country. That's partly a reaction to FDR's election and New Deal and massive reforms that he's introduced in the United States.
So from Canada, they would help to launch a coup against FDR?
No, Canada had its own branch of this movement to overthrow the government in Canada. Haldeman heads that branch. And through the 1930s, it takes on increasingly fascist overtones. They start wearing grey uniforms, modelled on the Nazi brown and black shirts. And so when Canada declares war on Germany in 1939 alongside Britain, the movement is banned because it's clearly sympathetic to Hitler. Then Haldeman is arrested.
Elon Musk's grandfather.
Elon Musk's grandfather is arrested. They find documents sympathetic to the Nazis and other subversive documents inside his house, and he is sent to prison for a few months and then remains on essentially a subversion watch list for the rest of the war. Yeah, so he's basically regarded as a Nazi sympathizer, a fellow traveler.
And about a decade later, he moves to South Africa. Why?
So after the war, he founds another political movement which has deep anti-Semitic roots and actually promotes the forgery, the protocols of the
Elders of Zion.
Elders of Zion, that's it. But obviously after the war and the Holocaust, there's no real appetite for that in Canada. It's a failing political movement. And so his eye casts down to South Africa. By 1950, the apartheid government has been in power for 2 years. And Haldeman looks at it and thinks that's just my kind of place, which clearly that was what he would want to create in Canada and had been trying to create in the 1930s. And so that's the point at which he and his wife, May, they move to South Africa and become very fervent supporters of apartheid.